So why is it called Restoring the Flow? The team really thought carefully about what this report was trying to do. And we're acknowledging that, Indigenous leadership can sort of be thought of in this situation as a river that's been blocked by a dam. You have a whole lot of momentum and progress coming from Indigenous leaders in remote communities, and they're meeting structural barriers that are the result of colonial governance system, outdated legislative and regulatory systems, and a general disempowerment and lack of resources. So what we're the policies that we're looking at in this report are really part of this broader project to restore the flow of decision-making power, of power that's related to clean energy in remote communities, and then also critically the flow of economic benefits of energy development and of energy infrastructure back to communities. So, the way that governments are reforming these policies is generally in response to Indigenous leadership, Indigenous activism, Indigenous projects. And we are essentially looking at those policies and saying, where is that collaboration happening and where is it working the best to facilitate these clean energy projects, these energy security projects, and this sort of future development of energy in remote communities. So to sort of put a bit of shape to the way that we're doing our evaluation, we looked at policies in sort of 5 key streams or sort of categories of policies. And these are collaboration with rights holders. So like I said, collaboration between Indigenous governments, development organizations, or other organizations and colonial governments, Canadian governments, is really an incredibly important foundation for all of this work. Are the Canadian government's actions really developed in line with the priorities of and the experiences of those Indigenous energy leaders? Also, a key sort of coordinating catalyst for a lot of these policies are plans and strategies for energy or climate. And it's very normal for territories and provinces to have an energy strategy, but it's it's a sort of a higher bar for them to have an energy strategy that explicitly acknowledges remote communities, especially in the provinces where remote communities are sort of making up a very small portion of the overall population. That being said, their remote communities are incredibly important to pay attention to. People's lives in remote communities are arguably far more impacted by their energy systems than they are for the rest of us who live on the grid and sort of enjoy relatively secure and affordable energy in Canada. So the plans and strategies really coordinate government efforts to address the barriers that folks are facing and coordinate other efforts to provide funding and programs. So with that, the next category here is actually that funding for community projects and also access to capital, so different financing mechanisms. This is, funding that would normally be going towards energy system development, but is actually earmarked for Indigenous communities and earmarked for remote communities. And we see this on the federal and the provincial level. The 4th stream of policies is programs for efficient buildings. So, housing is obviously incredibly important for energy use and then also community buildings. And so it's kind of a win-win to have more efficient buildings. You have cheaper energy costs and you use less energy. So it's really an important piece of the puzzle to have good programs for efficient buildings. But in remote communities, you face things like lack of qualified labor to do installations or difficulty getting materials. And so they do really require those sort of tailored supports in order to make these programs successful. And the last category is the market for clean power. So independent power producers are businesses that are external to the utility that are producing power, usually renewable energy, and selling it to the utility. And that's really important because a community-aligned independent power producer developing clean electricity for their community that is offsetting money that the utility would be spending on a fossil fuel supplier and putting it back into the community. So it's sort of another really strong co-benefit there of environmental attributes as well as community economic opportunity. And when we were looking at these different streams of policies, we wanted to sort of acknowledge that there's work happening in all of these different jurisdictions in all of these different areas. But in some places, that work has progressed further and there's sort of more momentum and more attention, whereas in other places, there's still sort of a lack of progress or momentum. So we use these sort of green, yellow, and red flow icons to indicate how strong we think the policy is at sort of progressing and advancing and enabling Indigenous-led clean energy. So a little bit of what the report looks like. There are these report card sections where we look at each different jurisdiction and what the jurisdictions, how they're doing in each of those categories with a little bit of blurb and the map of their remote communities. But following that, there's an in-depth write-up for each jurisdiction. So for folks here from the media, you can look at the jurisdiction that you're from and how well we're sort of thinking that those policies are working to support remote communities. And apologies for the small text on the screen, but you'll see this in the PDF, the embargoed PDF. And obviously, there's also one for the federal government. And the result is we've come up with this sort of table that shows is really meant to highlight where jurisdictions are doing well and where best practices can kind of be looked at and emulated from one jurisdiction versus the other. So I had to break this into 2 pages here, but all of the jurisdictions are here with their ratings. But again, for this to really make sense, it's worth diving into the jurisdiction-specific chapters. So some sort of key context with respect to this report is that there is a real strong relationship between regulatory sort of limitations that utilities face and their ability to support Indigenous-led clean energy. So certain jurisdictions have taken different approaches to addressing these sort of regulatory problems. And usually the regulatory problems are stemming from the fact that public utilities are regulated by these bodies that are really concerned with if the utility is providing power at the most economically efficient or the sort of the cheapest way, which isn't always aligned in the short term with renewable energy. In the long term, we see that renewable energy does result in savings on costs, especially as we expect fossil fuel prices to rise. So regulatory mandates really need to be reflective of the long-term value of renewable energy. The territories themselves also are facing a really challenging economic condition for developing energy because the territories don't have the large tax bases that the provinces enjoy to sort of subsidize their remote community operations. In certain territories, in the territories, they're all technically remote communities, but there are several regional grids in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. But that makes the sort of job of providing affordable, reliable power that much harder, paired with, like we said before, the challenges with climate change, and then the challenge of having geographically disparate populations. Another thing that's important, I've sort of highlighted it throughout, but energy security is really central to this work. For remote communities, having affordable, reliable power is a benchmark that honestly has not really been met in Canada yet in the same way that it has for folks on the grid. And, that's due to a number of logistical, technical, and political factors. But as we progress these conversations, there's a real focus on energy security. And one pathway for that is grid connection. There's ambitious grid connection projects in several of the provinces and territories. A big one just wrapped up in Ontario. That was an Indigenous-led grid connection that is, it's a really powerful way to address diesel security, but it's not right for every community because, or sorry, diesel dependency. It's not right for every community because obviously it's incredibly expensive and transmission lines traverse these very long sort of wilderness areas that are valuable as well as traditional territories to the community. So it really needs to be done in partnership with the community. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the really just high level key findings. And these may have come through in the way that I've introduced the report already. Strong relationships are so important to successful projects. So relationships between the utility and the community, and then as well the community leaders and the government, federal government and the provincial or territorial government. And the more collaboration we see, the more success we see. One really strong avenue for building that capacity for collaboration is this funding that supports full-time employment for people who live in the community or work for their community through the development corporation or the nation government or Inuit government. Ownership of energy infrastructure, like I said before, is a critical source of revenue. It's a critical economic opportunity for remote communities to be able to reinvest back in their community and bring their sort of energy visions to life. A lot of communities that have developed these projects and are owners of these projects have been seeing that revenue, and it's a really positive thing for the community. It creates this opportunity that wasn't otherwise there. And the aspect of this that's related to the federal funding and the provincial funding is, it's a strong avenue for economic reconciliation to be funding these projects because, like we said before, they're investments that need to be made in these energy systems. The diesel systems are at the end of their lives. And by essentially providing this funding to the community leaders, to community aligned projects, you are, advancing reconciliation through supporting Indigenous leadership, and you're displacing that money that would have otherwise gone to fossil fuel companies and kept it in the community. And we see that federal funds are really doing a lot of the lion's share of like the high dollar amounts for developing these projects, whereas the provincial and territorial funding programs are kind of equally important, but they're sort of funding more the early end of the project where sort of getting projects off the ground or doing smaller projects or things like that. And, the last thing that we have as a sort of a takeaway is that some of these really critically successful federal programs, which are looked at in detail in the report, are at risk of not being renewed in, 2025 with the sort of focus on major projects and nation building. And we would, continue to emphasize that these projects are, in fact, nation building. Remote communities are located throughout and at the extremities of Canada. And so, strong remote communities is intimately tied to Arctic sovereignty. It's intimately tied to Canadian sovereignty, and the, importance of these projects cannot be overstated. And these programs that are at risk of expiring or not being reinvested in have supported over 470 clean energy projects, and many of those are delivering critical economic opportunity and secure and reliable energy to their communities. So with that, I'm sorry that was a bit of a fire hose of everything from that report, but hopefully it was a bit of a primer that gets you excited to dig in to your respective jurisdictions and the federal jurisdiction. And, with that, we really wanted to set up a conversation with some folks from our Indigenous Advisory Council because they are the folks who are interacting with these policies and developing projects for their remote communities or remote communities that they work with. And I see that we have Blaine and Daryl on the line. I'm not sure if Jason was able to make it, but I would love to just invite Blaine and Daryl to give your introductions and share a little bit about your projects, but I'm going to prompt you with a couple questions first, and just let you all sort of reflect on those questions as you speak about your experiences. And then, we will move into a sort of a back and forth with the media right after that. So our questions for, Blaine and Daryl to be thinking about here, what are the barriers that you're facing as you're developing clean energy projects in remote communities? How does collaboration with government support your work and help to, remove some of those barriers or at least move through some of those barriers? What role does provincial or territorial funding play in your work? And how are you thinking about the current sort of national discussion around nation building, climate change, and Arctic security? Um, so I think maybe we'll start with Daryl, just because he was online first. If you'd like to come on and give your thoughts and speak a little bit about your work.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Daryl Brown. My company is called Kisik Clean Energy. I'm located in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg. My client, who I've been working with for the last 5 years, is the Seisi Dene First Nation on the shores of Taduli Lake in what is our most northern community in Manitoba. So they are a remote fly-in off-grid community. And the 5 years or 6 years now, actually, that we've been at this was really drawn out because of COVID and hyperinflation. But we've overcome those barriers. Do you want me to get into the answers to the questions, or?
Yeah, I would love if as you're speaking about your work, if you'd like to answer any of those questions, and we'll throw them in the chat. I just took the screen away. But
So the barriers that we faced when we, first I was hired by the then chief and council, from 6 years ago, when they saw what we had done in Gull Bay First Nation in Northwestern Ontario. They said, we need the same kind of help here. So renewable energy integration into their diesel gen sets, that's what we've been planning for all these years. Barriers, I can tell you that, the soft costs or the capacity building funding, that was the most important thing that kept this project going over all those years. And it was thanks to NRCan. I'm going to acknowledge them on their capacity building fund, which really allowed us to keep this project alive and growing and designed. The other barrier is the utility. And I'm not saying that because they are a true partner here in Manitoba, but it took a long time to negotiate and get them to come to the table and agree to all the conditions that we needed to be agreed upon in order for this project to be viable. So it was a challenge, but it worked out. And so we have a true partner in our utility here in Manitoba. Collaboration with government, well, all of the money came from the federal government. So we had 3 different funders that are allowing us to build this project now. So we're in procurement phase. We're ordering everything, including the solar array, the microgrid, and the battery storage energy system. All of that will land later this year. And then we're going to ship Winter Road. As long as we get a Winter Road, we're going to ship Winter Road in probably February or March of next year. And then once the thaw happens up there, we will start construction. This summer, we've already cleared the land. We're putting up fencing, we're prepping. So there's a lot of civil work going on this summer. And I just want to say again that you mentioned, Arthur, that there's like diesel gen sets are aging out, and that's very true. And so one of the conditions of our utility was that they demanded that they receive a sizable chunk of money to upgrade the diesel systems and to allow them to talk to the renewable energy. So again, NRCan stepped up and negotiated directly with our utility. And, it's over $4 million of upgrades that are allowing Manitoba Hydro to engage with us and eventually connect to our renewable energy. The other thing I'll say is that because of the capacity limitations of our client, the First Nation, we've had Manitoba Hydro agree to own and operate the battery and the microgrid. So they're actually going to take ownership and control of and maintenance of these two critical pieces, where the solar array will be owned and operated and maintained by the community, by Sesidene. So again, we thought if we looked at all of our experience and all of our fellow cohorts across Canada and what they're doing with their Indigenous clean energy, it just made sense to have the utility own and operate those two highly advanced pieces of the system. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to see if Blaine wants to jump in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Daryl. That was an incredible overview. Really appreciate it. So with that, yeah, let's pass it off to Blaine. Same questions, and give us a little bit about your background and your experience working on this.
Hey everyone, I'm Blaine Chiswitt. I'm Inuk from Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. Currently sitting in PEI, working on my engineering degree with my family of 5. But back to the projects. Projects that I started off with and are almost fulfilled here is the Ikiuk project in Nauyat, which is a 1.4 megawatt solar array with 1 megawatt battery storage. Currently in construction. All our panels are installed. Wiring coming up is going through now. And integration this winter to the QEC power plant. And we're following Daryl's lead on that of proposing that QEC owns the battery and the capital from the battery shack over, and the Inuit Dev Corp, Saku Investments Corporation, will own and operate the solar array. So going through the questions here, I gotta apologize. My daughter's working on her homework, so she has my laptop, and I'm working from my cell phone. The questions going through it is there was partnership and integration with the government. Huge, and the only way it makes it feasible towards any remote work, whether it's in the Bella Bella or whether it's in Baker Lake, right? So anywhere between left, right, and center. That's the only way it makes it feasible to be able to push for this well-needed push into the renewables future, because everyone sees renewables as older news, but a lot of the Indigenous communities and Indian communities and remote communities are just getting onto this push because of cost and the logistics of getting the equipment there, which has been huge. But luckily with Saku Investments Corp and all the key players we have working with us, we're able to push that and get the ships we need. Luckily, our Inuit in our region are very, very well with skilled labor and there's very, very good numbers who are ready and willing and who want to get trained up and who are already trained up. So that's the key, is to have that federal handshake with us that allows us to proceed with what we need with our goals. With the quote unquote nation building projects. Oh, I don't know if I have enough battery on my phone to keep on going with that. It's a touchy subject, and but it's a sort of a hurt towards me because I just opened up my own business, Unak Alternative Energy, coming online here on Friday when the business license is signed. So you'll see me around with that. But nation building is not just the Killick Hydro fiber line. It's not just an oil line going from coast to coast. The big push for NATO and sovereignty of Canada is the North, and they already use Inuit as poster children all across the Arctic to say it's Canadian sovereignty. Why don't they help us push towards that with nation building and community handshakes and cultural handshakes by allowing us to build our own power, produce our own power for our people, and that's going to have that cascade effect of allowing us to. If the region isn't as strong with skilled trades or engineers or academics, this will allow me to build that. This will allow me to pass the not just the generational knowledge, because my big push with my project is cultural consent and cultural acknowledgement. We're not stepping on toes. We're doing it right. Yes, it costs a few dollars more, but they won't talk about that in 30 years. They'll talk about how we did not ruin graves. They won't talk about how we did not flood out cultural areas. They'll talk about, oh, look, we found something that Inuit had found millennia ago because we did culturally sensitive. That's nation building. For a group of 6 or 7 men in a room saying this is how we're going to do it, Canada, it's sort of pisses me off. Sorry to be frank about it. But Arthur, he was saying it very well as well, that it's not the 5 big projects. The big 5 is not building the nation. It's not the only thing that builds the nation. I mean, it takes many hands to make light work. So that's our push towards that end of it. I could ramble on for hours on that, and I'm 2 hours ahead. So I from Central Time, so I'm running out of time already. But was there any other, what was the other question? Sorry.
No, I think you've done a really good job hitting all the questions, and I think
Okay,
there's going to be many more opportunities to speak